Ever wondered why people act out of character in certain roles, or how much influence authority and group dynamics can really have? In this collaborative episode of Cognitive Curves, we bring together expert perspectives to uncover the psychology behind one of the most controversial studies, the Stanford Prison Experiment. The voice you're hearing represents our team's unified insights, helping you understand how these findings relate to real life.
Welcome back, everybody, to the deep dive. This time, we're going deep into the psychology of influence.
Ooh, that's a good one.
It is. And to really get into it, we have to start with one of the most controversial experiments ever, the Stanford Prison Experiment.
It's definitely one that sparks a lot of debate even today.
Yeah, it does, but it also reveals a lot about how we behave in different situations.
Absolutely. And it shows just how much influence our surroundings can have.
Exactly. And that's what makes this deep dive so fascinating.
I agree. We're going to be looking at everything from role conformity to how groups can change our behavior, the surprising power of situations, and of course, what it all means for you in your everyday life.
So to kick things off, can you give us a quick overview of the Stanford Prison Experiment for anyone who hasn't heard of it?
Of course. So imagine this. Stanford University, 1971, researchers led by Philip Zimbardo set up a mock prison.
Right in the basement of one of the buildings?
Yeah, right in the basement. They got a bunch of college student volunteers and randomly assigned them to be either guards or prisoners.
Sounds simple enough.
Right. It was supposed to run for 2 weeks, a pretty standard study, but things went downhill really fast.
Yeah, I've heard it got pretty intense down there.
Oh, it did. The guards, with very few instructions, started acting super authoritarian.
Really?
Yeah, they were even abusive towards the prisoners. Sleep deprivation, verbal harassment, you name it, they did it.
Oh, wow.
I know, right?
Yeah.
They even made the prisoners do these humiliating tasks.
And how did the prisoners react to all this?
Not well. Many showed signs of extreme stress, some became depressed, and a few even tried to rebel.
So it sounds like a recipe for disaster.
It really was. And the study ended up being shut down after just 6 days.
6 days? Wow, that's way shorter than the planned 2 weeks.
Yeah, things escalated that quickly.
So the big question is, what went wrong?
That is the million-dollar question, and it's where we start to uncover some really fascinating insights about human behavior.
Okay, I'm all ears.
Well, one key factor was the power of roles.
You mean like the roles of guard and prisoner?
Exactly. Zimbardo gave the guards uniforms, to make it feel real. They even had batons and mirrored sunglasses.
Oh, wow, the whole 9 yards.
Yeah. And almost immediately, their behavior changed. They started acting in ways they never would have imagined.
It's kind of scary to think that just putting on a uniform could have that kind of effect.
I know, right? But it really highlights how much we underestimate the influence of our surroundings and the roles we play.
I never thought about it like that.
You see, the guards started by simply complying with what they thought was expected of them.
Because they were wearing a guard's uniform.
Yeah. Then they began to identify with the role, really getting into character. And for some, it went even further.
Deeper.
Yeah, their behavior became so ingrained that they basically internalized the authority.
Wow, so they weren't even acting anymore. They became the role.
Precisely. It's a phenomenon called role conformity. And it happens more often than you might think.
Really? Like when?
Well, think about it. Don't you act differently when you're at work versus when you're with friends or out at a fancy event?
You're right, I do. It's like I'm playing a different role in each situation.
Exactly. We all do it. We adapt to fit in, to meet expectations, to fulfill the roles we're given. But the Stanford Prison Experiment shows us the extreme end of this.
Yeah, it's a little unsettling to think about.
Definitely.
Yeah.
It raises the question, how far would any of us go if we were put in that kind of situation?
It makes you wonder.
It does. So we've got to remember that the guards weren't necessarily bad people.
Yeah, they were just college students, right?
Right. But the situation and the roles they were given really got to them.
And that's one of the key takeaways here, I guess.
It is. Even ordinary people, in the right circumstances, can do things they never thought possible.
Interesting. So it wasn't just the roles that were at play.
No, you're right. The researchers also saw that a lot of the guards got more aggressive over time.
More aggressive.
Yeah, and that suggests that just having power, regardless of your personality, can change how you act.
Okay, so we've got the power of roles and the power of the situation itself. But what about obedience? Why were those students so willing to follow orders, even when it meant hurting other people?
That's a great question, and it leads us to another fascinating piece of the puzzle. Stanley Milgram's obedience experiments.
Oh, yeah, I've heard of those. Weren't those the ones where people had to give electric shocks?
Yes. Participants were told to administer shocks to another person, and a surprisingly high number of them obeyed, even when they thought they were causing serious pain.
Yeah, it's crazy to think people would do that just because someone told them to.
Right. It was a groundbreaking study, and Milgram found that we're much more susceptible to the influence of authority figures than we realize.
So what makes people so obedient?
Well, it's not just blind obedience. There are specific factors at play.
Like what?
Things like how legitimate the authority figure seems, how close they are to the victim, and whether there's anyone else speaking up against it.
So it's not just about following orders, it's a lot more nuanced than that.
Exactly. And in the Stanford Prison Experiment, the guards were responding to the perceived authority of the researchers.
Makes sense. Plus they had all those symbols of power.
Exactly. The uniforms, the batons, it all added to their sense of authority. And it's a reminder that anyone, given the right conditions, can be susceptible to following orders, even if it goes against their morals.
This is getting pretty intense. It's amazing how much we can learn from this one experiment.
I know, right? And we've only scratched the surface. There's so much more to unpack about the Stanford Prison Experiment and its implications for our everyday lives.
I can't wait to dive in even deeper.
Me too. This is going to be fascinating.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We're continuing our deep dive into the psychology of influence.
Looking at how situations and groups can really affect us.
And using the Stanford Prison Experiment as a starting point, right?
Exactly. The SPE, as wild as it was, gives us some important insights.
Yeah, because some people might be listening and thinking, well, that's a crazy experiment, but I'm not a guard in a fake prison, so how does this apply to me?
It's a fair point. But think about it for a second.
Yeah.
Have you ever felt pressure to agree with a group, even if you didn't really agree?
Oh, all the time. It's hard to go against the grain.
Right. Or maybe you've seen something wrong happening but didn't say anything because you didn't want to cause trouble.
Oh, totally. Like in high school, I remember when my friends were teasing someone, and even though I felt bad, I just laughed along.
That's social identity theory in action. We want to belong to be part of the group, even if it means compromising our values.
So in that situation, I was putting my friends, my in-group, first.
You got it. You were playing the role of the good friend who goes along with the crowd.
Even though it felt wrong.
Exactly. We all play different roles in our lives, and those roles come with expectations that shape our behavior.
Okay, that makes sense. But what about the people who were doing the teasing? Were they just mean?
It's rarely that black and white.
So there's more to it.
Yeah, remember de-individuation, that feeling of losing your individual identity in a group.
Oh, right.
In that situation, your friends probably felt less inhibited because they were part of a group. It's easier to do something negative when you feel anonymous.
Like you're not fully responsible for your actions?
Exactly. It's like a diffusion of responsibility.
And this happens in real life too, right? Not just in experiments.
Absolutely. Think
Yeah.
about the internet. People say and do things online they'd never do in person.
Yeah, it's like the internet gives people a mask to hide behind.
You got it. Anonymity, whether it's literal or just perceived online, can lower our inhibitions. And that can lead to both good and bad behavior.
This makes me think about all those online mobs that attack people.
That's a perfect example. Groupthink and de-individuation are running rampant online.
It's easy to forget that there are real people on the other side of the screen.
It is. And our words can have real consequences. So we've got role conformity, social identity, de-individuation, and anonymity. What other psychological traps should we watch out for?
Okay, I'm ready for more. What else is there?
Well, let's talk about authority figures.
Oh, like bosses and teachers.
Yep. And even celebrities or influencers. We encounter authority figures everywhere.
Yeah, those influencers can be pretty persuasive. Sometimes I catch myself wanting something just because they're promoting it.
That's how powerful authority can be. We tend to trust and obey people we see as knowledgeable or important.
And it's not always a bad thing, right?
You're right, there are times when respecting authority is crucial for safety and order.
Okay, so how can we tell when authority is being used to manipulate us?
The key is to be aware of this dynamic so we can make conscious choices and not blindly follow along.
So we need to think for ourselves even when faced with someone who seems to have all the answers.
Exactly. Don't just accept what someone says because they have a fancy title or a lot of followers.
Right. So how do we resist that pressure?
It takes critical thinking.
Critical thinking.
Yeah, don't take things at face value. Ask yourself, what's their motivation? Are they being fair and balanced? Do their claims match up with my own experiences?
Good points. It's like we have to constantly check ourselves.
That's a great way to put it. And this goes beyond authority figures. Use that critical thinking when you're online, reading news articles, even talking with friends.
So always question, analyze, and evaluate the information we're taking in.
Exactly. The more we do that, the less likely we are to be manipulated.
This is a lot to take in. It's like a mental workout.
It is.
Yeah.
But like any muscle, our critical thinking skills get stronger with practice.
So we've covered roles, groups, authority, and our own vulnerability to influence. What else can we learn from the Stanford Prison Experiment?
Let's talk about moral disengagement.
Moral disengagement. What's that?
Remember how the guards in the SPE justified their cruel behavior?
Yeah, how did they do that? Didn't they feel bad?
They did at first, but over time they used strategies to distance themselves from what they were doing.
Strategies like what?
They dehumanized the prisoners, downplayed the harm they were causing, blamed the victims, and spread the responsibility around the group.
Wow, that's messed up. It's like they were twisting reality.
That's exactly what moral disengagement is. It's a way to protect our self-image when our actions don't match our beliefs.
So are you saying we all have the capacity for this? That we could justify doing bad things under the right circumstances?
It's a tough pill to swallow, but yes, the potential is there in all of us, and it doesn't have to be some huge, terrible act.
Like, what kind of everyday situations are we talking about?
Think about times you might have cheated on a test or lied to get out of something.
Oh, okay, I get it. We make excuses for ourselves so we don't feel guilty.
Right. And the more we do it, the easier it becomes to justify bad behavior. So we have to be aware of these patterns and challenge ourselves when we start rationalizing things.
This is heavy stuff, but it's also really eye-opening. It feels like I'm seeing myself and the world in a whole new way.
That's the power of understanding these psychological forces. But we've only just scratched the surface. There's still more to explore.
Welcome back to the deep dive. We've been exploring some pretty deep stuff about the psychology of influence.
Yeah, from that intense Stanford Prison Experiment to how it all plays out in our everyday lives.
And I feel like we've uncovered some pretty powerful forces at work.
Absolutely. But now we need to talk about what we can actually do with all this knowledge.
Right, because it can feel a bit overwhelming, like, okay, I get it, these things influence us, but what now?
That's a great point. So where do we start? Well, it all begins with self-awareness.
Self-awareness.
Yeah, the more we understand our own tendencies, like how we react to authority or pressure from groups,
Right.
the better equipped we are to handle those tricky situations.
So it's like taking a personal inventory, figuring out where our weak spots are.
Exactly. If you know you're someone who avoids conflict, you got to be extra careful in group settings where you might stay silent even if you disagree.
And if you're easily swayed by authority, like we were talking about before.
Right. You got to be more critical of their requests,
Yeah.
especially if they seem unreasonable.
It's like having a mental checklist, huh? Am I feeling pressured? Am I about to make a decision I don't agree with?
Yes. That kind of awareness can really make a difference in how we respond to challenges.
Instead of just going with the flow, we can stop, think, and make a choice that feels right.
Exactly. But what about those situations where things are already going wrong?
Yeah.
Like if you see someone being bullied at work,
Yeah, that's a tough one, especially if you're afraid to speak up.
that's where courage comes in and understanding the bystander effect,
Right.
It's easy to feel powerless, especially if the bully is someone in a position of authority.
Yeah, but speaking up could put your own job at risk.
That's true. It's important to weigh the risks and figure out the best approach. Sometimes a direct confrontation isn't the safest or most effective way to handle things.
So what are the other options?
Documentation is crucial. If you witness something, write it down. Dates, times, specific actions, names of people involved.
So create a paper trail.
Exactly. That can be really important if you ever need to take formal action.
Makes sense. But what if it's more subtle, like harassment or exclusion? Something that's hard to document.
That's when finding allies can be so helpful.
Allies.
Yeah, talk to trusted colleagues, mentors, HR, anyone you feel comfortable with.
So don't suffer in silence.
Exactly. Sharing your concerns with others can validate your experience and provide support.
There's power in numbers.
Absolutely. And sometimes just asking questions can help shift the dynamic.
Questions.
Yeah, like, I'm a bit concerned about how this decision might impact X. Could we consider some other options? Something like that.
So even if I'm not comfortable directly challenging someone, I can still voice my concerns.
Exactly. It's about encouraging reflection and hopefully sparking a change in behavior.
This has given me a lot to think about. It's not always easy to stand up for what's right.
You're right. It takes courage and effort. But remember, we all have a role to play in creating ethical and supportive environments.
Okay, so we've talked about self-awareness, courage, finding allies, and speaking up, even when it's tough.
Yeah. we've covered a lot of ground for.
Is there anything else we can take away from this deep dive?
Let's circle back to moral disengagement.
Could we already talk about that?
We did, but there's a surprising twist. Remember, we discussed how it allows us to justify bad behavior. Well, we can actually use it for good, too.
Wait, how's that possible?
Well, think about social movements that challenge deeply ingrained norms and beliefs. Things like the fight for civil rights or environmental activism.
Okay.
Those movements often need people to disengage from the existing social order and embrace a new set of values.
Oh, I see what you mean. It's like using that same psychological mechanism but flipping it on its head.
Exactly. By understanding moral disengagement, we can challenge harmful systems, advocate for positive change, and hold ourselves and others accountable for creating a better world.
Wow, that's a powerful thought.
It is, and it shows that even these seemingly negative psychological forces can be harnessed for good.
This deep dive has been incredible. I feel like I have a whole new perspective on how these influences work.
And more importantly, I hope you feel empowered to navigate them more effectively.
Me too. So as we wrap up, what's the one key takeaway you want our listeners to remember?
I want them to remember that even though these psychological forces are strong, we are not powerless against them.
We have the ability to make choices.
Exactly. By understanding how these influences work, by becoming more self-aware, and by finding our voices, we can make choices that align with our values and create a more ethical world.
That's a great message to end on. So to all our listeners out there, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep pushing for a better future.
And until next time, keep diving deep into the fascinating world of human behavior.
We've explored the fascinating world of influence and the power of situations, revealing that while psychological forces are strong, they're not unbeatable. With self-awareness, critical thinking, and the courage to speak up, we can make choices that reflect our values. Keep questioning, keep reflecting, and as always, dive deeper into the complexities of human behavior with cognitive curves. Don't forget to subscribe, drop a comment with your thoughts, and let's keep the conversation going.